What do a speaking coach, a strategy consultant, and an executive coach have in common? Sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? But honestly, it's all about finding out what people do, their jobs, the stories, the struggles, coffee breaks, the real stuff you wouldn't find in a job title.
Welcome to a space where we sit down with people from all kinds of careers, have a laugh, and dive into what makes their work meaningful. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just here for a good story, let us be your guide. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Charlie.
And let's get
Casually Pro.
Pro.
Today we have a really interesting guest, Gregg Schoenberg. He's everything from an investor to an executive coach, worked in government, finance, tech, the whole nine. I think the only thing you don't have on your resume is the kitchen sink. Isn't that right, Gregg?
That is correct. I really shouldn't be left anywhere near a kitchen or in a kitchen. So yes, that is not something that I pride myself on. But apart from that, I've managed to do a lot of fun things in my career. And thank you for that warm intro.
Yeah, absolutely. So we met through Beyond Connections, the group that Ronan Ilshensky and Keith Ferrazzi are building to create connectors. And you've really shown me how important it is to have an advisor, have someone in your corner to know what you're doing, how you can improve, and really what you can see past the horizon of business. So for our listeners and for anyone who's not familiar with your work, could you give us the basic overview of what you do and why it's so cool?
Sure. So in the current iteration of my career, and I've had like 6 or 7 different iterations, I am primarily an executive coach. I have a portfolio of private companies that I have invested in over time that I also work with, but I'm about 80% executive coach, 20% angel investor slash board member.
Okay, very cool. So you are not just the money, you're the brains behind the operation as well.
Well, look, I mean, the reality is I used to do executive coaching in the context of being an angel investor, but I didn't think of myself as an executive coach. And so what I did a couple of years ago was I decided to unbundle what I do as a coach from what I do as an angel investor. And I'm able to touch a lot more companies as a coach than I could as an angel investor because my checkbook isn't that large. So I love sharing insights and knowledge and helping executives, regardless of whether or not I'm on the cap table or not. And I quite frankly think I'm a better coach than I am investor anyway. And, being in a position where I can do what I love and have both the benefits that come from meeting with and getting to know a lot of executives, but also, taking a couple of shots on goal with some investing is a great combination for me.
Oh, so you are doing coaching, but also investing. I wonder, Greg, if when you invest in a company, are you also coaching the leader teams?
I wind up evolving into that, where particularly if I have a good relationship with the CEO, and I won't invest in any company if I don't have a good relationship with the CEO, I wind up doing the coaching for free. However, because I mentioned before, my checkbook isn't that big, I, in most instances, just serve as a coach. And I do some coaching work with some executives of large companies too, where, maybe I own the stock, but I don't have a meaningful stake in the company. So I realized when I was an angel investor that while I was pretty good as an investor, I was even better as a coach. And that is what spurred me on to say, you know what, I'm going to get myself certified and call myself an executive coach first and foremost.
It feels like such a natural progression because when you really have an investment or a stake in something, you want to make sure it's doing well, but you also want to make sure that the people that they have in their corner are giving the advice that they need to succeed. And who's better to do it than the person that's right there next to them the entire way that they're working, right? So I think that makes perfect sense. Could you tell us about an interesting project maybe that you've taken on recently, an interesting kind of area or angle of coaching that you have discovered or really want to talk about the passion you have for it?
Sure. So most of my coaching work is done either with folks in the financial services or healthcare space and or in startups. Those tend to be the areas where my networks are strongest. And, I have enough expertise given the things that I've done in my career such that I'm able to add value as a coach. However, every once in a while around the edges, for one reason or another, I get opportunities to coach people who are in completely different walks of life. And one of them that I recently completed a coaching engagement with was the head chef at a multi-Michelin starred restaurant. This client wants to get into business, and cooking is a young person's game. You're hunched over, the hours are terrible, the pressure is ridiculous, and so he kind of knew his time in the kitchen would be coming to an end sooner rather than later, and didn't know how to get from being in the kitchen into the business world, kind of leveraging all of his knowledge. And so I had a chance to work with him. I wrote into the contract that my wife and I were entitled to a meal at the chef's table.
I would do the same.
Good one.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that was so much fun. And one of the things, I spent a couple of times in his kitchen just because I wanted to observe him in action. And he did this really funny thing. He asked me to stand over in the corner of the kitchen, and then he put some tape in a small area, and he said, "You go in there, and unless I tell you to, you are not allowed to leave that little area." And I appreciated why. Like, when you were talking about a top restaurant in the world, the level of precision and the intentionality behind every move is unlike anything I have ever seen in my life. It's like you're on, a stage, right, at a big theater. Everything that you do is carefully choreographed. And so while the pressure is that of, a high energy trading floor, the physical embodiment of it is like being in a theater. And it was so much fun. I hope to get another chef. I want more good meals too.
Oh wow! I wonder, Greg, since everything was so well made and choreographed, did you
Yeah.
feel there were stress going in the kitchen, or since everyone knew what to do, it was quiet, relaxed, but still high output?
So yeah, it's a great question, Jeff. Only a Frenchman would ask a question like that, right? It was quiet, but also highly pressurized. So it wasn't like a trading floor where it's loud and high pressure. It was quiet and high pressure. And the contrast of those two vibes was fascinating.
Incredible. It's really a marvelous thing seeing someone who's a master at their craft get serious about what they're doing. And I think in a kitchen, in a trading floor, any kind of really high level, intensive, creative job, it's almost just the show itself, seeing the work get done. But that's so cool. So, uh, in terms of your coaching, I know there are a lot of things that you believe in, you kind of impart on your executives that are counter to what a lot of people would think is the right move. And one of them that I find really fascinating is you don't like packing your team with all stars or anyone's team with all stars. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. Um, I have sat before a number of CEOs pitching me, and many, many times they will often say to me, "We have an all-star team."
Can we please define all-star? I'm sure.
Sure. What they mean are people who are the very tippy top of their field and who essentially can dominate in any environment they go into. Think LeBron James, right? LeBron James, the ultimate all-star. When LeBron is on your team, you know your team has a shot to win, right? All you have to do is give the ball to LeBron, and there's a chance you'll win. In the business context, right, there are many people out there who think they are LeBron, and some of them are, right? Some of these people are so high impact, they are in fact capable of putting any company they are involved with in a situation where they can win. When a CEO, though, says to me, "We have a team of all-stars," that is such a red flag. I essentially shut down, and I don't even listen to what they have to say afterwards, because I know I'm not going to invest in them, and I know I'm not going to coach them. Now,
Mm,
reason, because people are saying, why wouldn't you want a team of all-stars, is because that is not what makes, in my opinion, the magical teams and the magical success stories. I believe you need role players. I believe if everybody wants the ball every time and everyone wants the glory every time, you are not going to have the team that ultimately creates the magic necessary to win. And
mm.
so it's good to have one all-star on your team, maybe two. But when you have five people on your team, all of whom want the ball every time, nobody happy to get the rebound, to make an assist, to put up great numbers, but do so in a selfless manner where your numbers are not, flashy. That's what you need, right? You need people to be happy to be in the background. And too often, when you have a team of all-stars, you have a team of egos, you have a team of people who want to claim all the credit, and essentially you find yourself in a situation where the culture of those types of organizations just totally sucks. So, of course, you can find the exception to the rule, but you know what? For me, I have no interest in being a part of teams like that. I want good people, right? But I want role players and people who are perfectly happy letting others have the limelight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nobody likes a ball hog, right? That I think that's a very common team orientated thing. And I think something that a lot of people forget is that it's really great to be known for something and excel in an area, but if you're part of an organization and you're competing with the guy next to you, the real competition is outside the organization, not inside, or at least that's the way it should be, right? And
Should be.
so the all star should be the organization, not you, or at the very least, not the guy who needs to pass the ball. So I love that thought, that line of thinking. And it runs contrary to a lot of coaches and a lot of really basic ideas of how we look at team building. But on top of that, you don't like result orientated basis, right? You are very profoundly anti-results orientated.
Yes. I'm profoundly anti-results oriented, but just before we leave the other topic, I think if anything, I love it when I find a company whose system is an all-star, right? There is this concept in geopolitics called the resource curse, right? And certain countries that have a lot of oil, right, are known as being resource cursed, because when you have a huge amount of oil in the ground, you don't develop your people, you don't develop a robust economy, and
Mm,
you're essentially tethered to the price of that commodity. In the long run, countries that rely overly, on resources tend to be ones that don't move their people ahead as much. And so I view a all-star in some ways like, 1 million barrels of oil in the ground of a company. Systems are a much better way to go.
mm. Yeah, 100%. I think if I put all my eggs in one basket, that's probably a recipe for disaster. Anyone can think of that, but not too many people think of that when they're looking at expertise. Great way to think of that, by the way. But, you know, I think when you're looking at the overall result, you want to have a strong team. You want to have an organization that can perform. So why not results orientated in terms of your
Okay.
outlook?
Okay. So you guys are both going to need to hang with me for a minute here while I explain this. Okay. It's a little bit weird.
Okay.
Um,
Interesting.
one of the books that has changed my life is a book called Thinking in Bets. And the writer of that book is a woman named Annie Duke. And I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with Annie Duke and familiar with the book. But if not, like, as soon as you get off with me and you edit this episode, go and buy the book. Like, and if you buy it and you don't like it, I'll give you your money back, or something like that, or I'll buy you a coffee. She talks about a concept called resulting, which is you get the result, and then once a result is achieved, you infer back to all the things that you did to lead to that result. She became a champion poker player and would think about life and the choices that were made through the framework of poker. It is also the case, however, that on any given hand, you can get really, really lucky, or you could get really unlucky. So, for an example, let's say you have a great hand. There's only one hand in the entire deck that can beat your hand. And so you bet very aggressively. The guy sitting next to you happens to get that one card, the only card that could have possibly enabled him to win. He gets it, and he wins all the money, and you're busted. Did you make the wrong decision by betting aggressively? The answer is no. You made the right decision. On any given hand, however, you can have a bad outcome. So let's talk about this within the business and investing world. Has it ever occurred in the history of venture investing where a VC firm aggressively backs a portfolio company, right? Puts them in their portfolio, gives them a ton of money, and the portfolio company goes to zero? The result is bankruptcy. Has it ever happened where the investment committee gets together and says, you know, the mistake that we made is that we didn't give this company more money? And you say, oh, you mean because more money would have ultimately led the company to be successful? No, it still would have gone bankrupt. But given the available information that we had at the time, the right choice was to have invested more money in the company because the opportunity was amazing. But a crazy thing happened. They wound up going to zero, busted, but the decision-making process was good. And so when people focus in on results, what they do is not focus on the decision-making process. On any given hand, on any given year, on any given deal, you can ultimately get unlucky or get really, really lucky. But just because you got lucky or unlucky has really nothing to do with the repeatability associated with the process. So by being more focused in on the process and caring less about the results on any given instance, you actually have better results over the long term. But in order to get there, you can't define your success or failure based upon how the last year went or how the deal went, because too many factors can create noise around a given situation, and therefore people tend to over-infer based upon the results of whether or not they did the right thing. So I try to ignore results in a given month or even a given year, much in the same way that I ignore what the stock market did today. I couldn't care less, because that really doesn't speak to the long-term trends. And over the long term, I win more by ignoring the short-term data points that I get from quote unquote results. Does that make sense?
Wow. Oh, yeah, that's so counterintuitive. I'm a former poker player, so I completely know what you talk about. It's so frustrating to play well, but to lose because you had bad luck. And when it comes to business and life in general, nothing is 100% certainty. We always have things that are completely unexpected that happens, sometimes that we know, sometimes that we don't know. And so the outcome is never completely certain. And I love how you put it this way, to say that the short-term results are mostly noise. And if you only use short-term results to direct where you're going, you might be heading in a completely wrong direction.
No, thank
And
you.
so, Greg,
I just let me just add, I have this one
yeah,
company where the CEO has 4 salespeople, and he wanted to promote one of them to be the head of sales. And I said, why? And he said, well, because she beat her numbers handily this year and nobody else did. And just given the framework I have, I said, well, wait a minute, is she really better? Is she doing things in the long run that the other salespeople are not? And the answer was not really, but she got results. And so I yelled at him for a half hour and, no, I'm kidding. I didn't yell at him, but I made the point that that was not the basis upon which he should make the decision. And it worked out.
We could imagine a moment where a salesperson makes great numbers, but was actually destroying the relation the company have with many other customers. So
Exactly.
they could have great results on the short term, but destroying everything on the long term. Greg, you told about focusing on the process rather than the short term results. Can you tell us more about how you evaluate this process?
Well, it's largely dependent on the specific process that I am evaluating. A sales process is going to, work a hell of a lot differently than, say, how a CFO is conducting his or her job or a CEO is leading an organization. So it's hard for me to give you one formula that works, other than to say that what typically is a signifier of a good process in my mind is somebody who doesn't run away from pain, but runs into pain and doesn't try to avoid difficult decisions, but recognizes that a difficult decision avoided today becomes even more difficult tomorrow. So I like to see that. I like to see people who are constantly declaring war on their own inefficiencies and people who are constantly figuring out a way, much like I described to you that kitchen, who are constantly trying to figure out a way to optimize and improve and are never happy with their laurels and what they have accomplished. And then thirdly, people who've built into their process humility. And when you think that you are always the smartest, when you're always dispensing the advice, when you are never getting advice, when you are never learning from people who are smarter than you, that's a bad sign. But when even people who are incredibly successful are incorporating into their process a willingness to learn, that is a good sign. And so those are the types of things that I look for.
I think one of the biggest things that people forget, at least in the upper echelons of executive function, is that you have to be constantly learning. Your position as a coach can only exist because people themselves get stuck in a very basic idea of what they want to do, how they want to do it, and the results that they're looking for. And so if you're not constantly adjusting, you're either falling behind or worse, dragging everyone down with you. I think this idea of constant education is really important. Could you tell us about maybe someone that you've learned from and gained a lot of what makes you build this coaching business?
Well, so one story that comes to mind, after I sold a company that I had built and was lucky enough to sell, I did a deal with TechCrunch. And essentially I traveled around the country on TechCrunch's dime. They didn't pay me a lot, but they helped me meet a lot of cool CEOs.
Oh, it's a
And
great perk.
yeah, that was a good perk. And I was sort of their financial innovation guy. And after I had sort of interviewed everyone within fintech that I was interested in speaking with, I decided to broaden the definition of financial innovation to include hedge fund managers and private equity managers.
Mm.
And I wound up being lucky enough to build a relationship with Ray Dalio and another guy by the name of Steven Schwarzman, who Steven Schwarzman is the co-founder and for a long time the CEO of Blackstone, and now he's the chairman of Blackstone.
Mm.
And he told me something that has profoundly impacted the way in which I analyze situations. He described how at Blackstone, they have something called a negative only meeting. And so before Blackstone, I don't know if they still do this, but they did at the time. Before Blackstone approves a deal, for let's say an LBO company they're going to take private, they will convene a meeting where people who come to the meeting are only allowed to say negative things about the deal.
Wow.
Only
Mm,
negative things. And he said that over time, even though at first everyone was like, no effing way, over time, this has resulted in them having a better batting average than if they didn't institute this policy. And it was a structural change, right? Based upon the way in which most private equity firms work. But it's
mhm,
predicated on the idea that if you're a private equity professional, right, you want people to support your deal, and in exchange, you're going to support their deal, even if, maybe you don't love their deal, maybe they don't like your deal, but you're going to horse trade. And while that might be good for you personally, it's not good for the firm to have a bunch
mm,
of deals endorsed that the firm isn't fully willing to stand behind. But people don't want to be jerks to each other, particularly if they're going to see them at the water cooler, the metaphorical and figurative water cooler as well as the literal water cooler, right?
mhm,
But you need to create a structural change in order to liberate people's thinking. And what he did was the negative only meeting. And that leads to all sorts of new ways in which people are going to communicate with each other without them taking it personally.
mhm.
And figuring out ways to give honest feedback to people without them taking it personally is something that I bring into my coaching. So, as an example, based upon that idea from Stephen, what I do is sometimes with people who are trying to reinvent themselves, right? They've been
Mhm.
very successful executive, but they want to do something new and they don't really understand where their weaknesses are because they're so used to everyone telling them how amazing they are for any number of reasons. What I will say is, I want you to go out to 10 people who you trust and respect. I want you to indemnify them, and I want you to instruct them to be brutal, to write down all of the things that they think you suck at, that they think you're
Oh.
wrong about, that they think you are inept at. And make sure that you indemnify them so they know you're not going to turn around and be angry at them. But when you liberate them, to actually, be honest with you, you can do it from a position of love and care. And so I have been very fortunate as a result of having given that assignment, that homework to some people who I've coached for them to come back to me and be like, wow, I had all these blind spots, or I thought I was so good at A, B, and C, when as it turns out, most people think I suck at it. But you've got to figure out a structure that can allow for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the most successful people I know have a bias towards explicit communication. Don't pull punches, don't create spaces where, the gray area is king, but also create something that makes sure that anyone that you're giving constructive criticism to knows that it is constructive criticism. It's not meant to hurt you, and quite the opposite. It's meant to help. It's meant to give you insight into the areas that you can improve on or should improve on to get to that next step. So that's
But
an
Charles, you've got
incredible
to
way of thinking.
you've got to create the structure though. It's not
Yeah,
enough for me to say, "Hey, Charles, let's get together and let's talk about some things I'm good at, some things I'm bad at." It has to be, no, no, no. Charles, I'm looking at you in the eye, right? Jeffrey, I'm looking at you in the eye. You are not allowed to say anything positive about this memo I just wrote. You have to tell me only negative stuff, and do not worry about hurting my feelings.
incredible. Would you say that people react positively to that? Because I feel, like with what happened with Blackstone, there's a lot of hesitancy going on with giving people criticism, especially at upper echelons. I know you probably deal with it a lot with executives trying to tell them, well, this is something that you really need to improve on. This is a real weak point in your structure or in the way that you're leading your team. How do they react to that?
I mean, it runs the gamut, right? Like some people say, "Oh yeah, I can take constructive feedback and criticism," but they really can't. They just say that because they know they're supposed to say that. Other people really mean it, but everyone thinks they're an above average driver. Everybody will tell you they're great at taking criticism, but sometimes it's actually the case, but other times it's not. And my logo as a corporate coach is a red stapler. because early on in my investment banking career, the woman who I was working with on a deal got so fed up with me, she threw a stapler at my head. And as the years have gone by,
Wow.
I've come to take that on as a little bit of a badge of honor, where if on occasion my clients don't feel like throwing a stapler at my head, that means I'm not doing my job right.
Incredible. The amount but it's so true because I've never had any growth without pain. And I think that's true for most people. I had a wonderful professor during my college years going through my accounting degree who used to whip chalk at my head. Um, but that's because I wasn't asking the right question. He knew what the answer was for what I wanted to get to, but I wasn't getting to it the way that he thought was the most efficient way. And I think most people value that efficiency. That's the reason that you get paid the big bucks, right? Is that you can take something very complex, like an idea of leading a team, and say, well, just do A, B, C, and D, and you should be good as long as you keep X, Y, Z in mind. So, with all of this kind of business power that you have going along in terms of getting access to executives and really high performing teams, is there anyone in particular that you were really excited to meet, or on the other side, who you really just begrudgingly took the meeting with, or even just outright said, no, I'm not doing the meeting?
Well, look, I am I'm very protective of my energy, uh,
Mm,
more so even than my time. I am getting positive energy from this conversation. So because of that, I am delighted to be spending this time with you. If
mm,
I were getting negative energy out of it, I'd be like, sorry guys, time's up, right? So I try to quantify things in terms of whether or not they're energy beneficiaries for me or energy vampires for me. Um, Most of the time, I am lucky enough to put myself in situations where I'm getting positive energy from my interactions. I choose, I mean, I rarely say to a prospect, I'm not going to work with you, but I have on occasion told a client, I don't think we would be a good match. I can make some recommendations of some other coaches. So I have done that on occasion. So I think much more about energy than I do time, but I also think a lot about etiquette and my series of rules about how I spend my time, who I spend my time with, who I don't. And to that point, I have, in sort of really interesting ways, I think I've turned down dinner opportunities with impressive people. And I feel great about that because I have a set of principles that I try and live by, and I try not to violate them. Also, when I notice little things about people that demonstrate to me they care or they're just high quality people, I will over index to them. So
mm.
I have a bunch of rules that float around in my head that I try to sometimes impart to my clients that govern where I invest myself and my energy.
Can you tell us
Absolutely, yeah.
more on how you create and maintain relations with people?
Well, I guess what I would say on that is I am a big believer in helping people. I'm a big believer in doing nice things for people. But I also know that no matter how wonderful a first meeting is or a first meal is, um, you don't know somebody, really know somebody until you have seen them under a variety of different circumstances. So I have this framework. I talk about breadsticks and truffles. Breadsticks are sort of the nice little things that I will be willing to do for people without any expectation of ever receiving anything back or any expectation that they're even going to show explicit appreciation for me. But much like the salad bar at the Olive Garden, I've got unlimited breadsticks. So I'll
Mm,
gladly do that all day for people, whether I know them well or not. But in order to get a truffle, right? In order to get something that is really valuable that I have to offer to somebody, a game-changing introduction for their career or getting a friend's kid a job, things that take a lot of capital, I reserve those for people who I know well, who I have seen through different circumstances, who I've had a fight with and have actually had to go through the process of making up. Those are the characteristics I need before I'm going to really put myself out in a major way for people. It's just like I was talking to somebody recently, a new friend who said that he has a girlfriend he's so excited about. They're going to go out on their first weekend and have a little getaway. And I said, great, I really hope you get into a big fight, you know? And he's like, what are you talking? Your relationship will not go to that next place until you have a good old-fashioned fight. So I hope you really get into it and then come back to me. Let me know how you resolve the fight. Let me know how you moved on, and then we can talk about your enthusiasm.
At risk of my
Is that
wife hearing this, you're absolutely entirely correct. I
Yeah.
don't think I don't think I really got to know my wife or really get to know anyone until you have that big kind of head-butting moment where it's like, no, I'm right, you're wrong. And then you have to realign yourself to think, okay, well, how can we both be right?
Speaking of spouses, can I tell you guys a fun little story that involves George Clooney?
Oh my God, please do.
Tell us. We want to know.
So, my wife and I and our kids used to live in Brooklyn, and in Brooklyn, you get to meet a lot of really interesting people in the arts and all that. And so I wound up becoming really good friends with a director, very private guy, not somebody who is like, you know, a major celebrity who can't walk down the street by himself, but like, you know, a director's director, like somebody who within the craft is highly respected. And my kids were little at this time. I remember that, and my wife and I were just exhausted. And you know, we had a weekend that we had planned to go away to Martha's Vineyard together, and the kids were going to be watched by grandparents, and we had a babysitter, and a lot of logistics were established in advance, and we were just really looking forward to this long weekend to reconnect. And so my director friend of mine said, knowing, by the way, that I know a lot about politics, I've been a political junkie my whole life. I don't play golf. I play politics, right? Um, this director friend of mine said, "Hey, are you free for dinner on Friday night?" And I said, "Yeah, no, I'm going away. You know, we're going to Martha's Vineyard." But out of curiosity, I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, Clooney is coming to town and he and I are having dinner. And I know you're like really into politics and George is really into politics. And I think it would be fun if you came along." I said, "Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you very much." And I didn't say no. I hung up the phone and I thought about it for 2 minutes. And I texted him back and I said, "Sorry, can't make it, but I appreciate the offer." And he picked up the phone and he's like, "Did you hear my question? I just gave you the opportunity to have dinner with me and Clooney at some cool restaurant in Brooklyn where everyone will probably notice, right? Who, you know, everyone will recognize Clooney. Maybe you'll get your picture in like the New York Post or whatever. Are you sure?" He's like, "You'll look really cool, like just hanging out with George Clooney." Like he understood it. And I said, "No, no, no, I appreciate it." And I was trying to figure out why I did that. And I talked to my wife about it. My wife is like, "Oh my gosh, you should have gone to the dinner. Like, you know, we would
Yeah.
have made the other plans. Like, we would have changed our flight and whatever." And I sort of did some self-therapy on why I made that decision.
Mm.
And what it came down to is like, and this is a particular peeve of mine, but I think other people have this issue. Nothing is worse, I think, than when I've got plans with someone. If Jeffrey and I have plans, right? And a better offer comes along that Charles says, "Hey, Jeffrey, you know, I got an extra ticket to this, you know, amazing performance, right? An extra Taylor Swift ticket, right? Do you want to come?" And if Jeffrey then calls me back, it's like, sorry, Greg, something came up. I'm going to the Taylor concert with Charles. Like I've been choiced over, right?
Mm,
You found a better opportunity. And in the long run, I just feel like you create negative karma in the world when you do that. So I'm not saying
mm,
there isn't any instance in the world where, I wouldn't explain to the person, hey, something has come along and I really think I need to do it for reasons A, B, and C. But I think people do that to each other a lot, or at least more than people admit to doing it. And I think it's a really bad thing and it's a slippery slope. And once you start doing that a little bit, you start day trading your relationships and figuring out how to optimize on any given Friday or Saturday night for yourself. And I don't want to be that guy. And the reality is, maybe in the back of my mind, I was like, I wouldn't be fooling anyone. Like, sure, I'm sitting there with Clooney, but nobody's thinking that he and I are working on a script together. Nobody's thinking like we hang around in Como together and, drink his tequila. I wouldn't be fooling anyone. It would just be the random lucky hand in poker that I got dealt.
mm.
And so it really wouldn't have had an impact. But my wife might have been like, hmm, maybe my husband isn't as solid as I think he is because he just went off and gallivanted around with his friend and Clooney. So I know this is a long-winded story, but I really believe in slippery slope danger. And I'm not saying I don't make that, yeah, I don't make mistakes that could lead to that. But in general, I think you want to be very, very vigilant about giving yourself the benefit of the doubt too much when you
Mm.
compromise your own principles.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
tough.
We've talked a lot about, it seems like, etiquette, right? There's etiquette in the way you approach something. There's etiquette in the way that you choose how to give criticism. There's etiquette in the decisions and the opportunities that you take, right? And something that I'm super curious because I looked it up. I couldn't really find too much other than stuff that you were putting out about this etiquette alpha.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious. I want to know what about etiquette alpha makes you so obsessed with it, and how does that inform your success today?
Came from my exposure to the hedge fund world. So to just kind of back up for a minute, just to make sure that all of your listeners are on the same page, because not everybody spends time reading about hedge funds. Um, Alpha refers to excess return, right? So if the S&P did 8% for the year, right? And your trading ultimately led to a 20% gain, you have 1,300 basis points or 13% of alpha. You outperformed your benchmark by 13%. That's what makes hedge fund managers rich when they outperform their benchmark by a lot because they create additional return. So applying that to my business of coaching, and apologies for my dog barking in the background. He's saying amen, right? He's totally on board with everything I'm saying. Um, um, Most people in the professional world, like the three of us, are very, very good at presenting a facade. Okay, so how does this apply? I'm not saying it in a bad way when I say that people put on a facade, but we do it over Zoom. We do it in business meetings. We are not really showing the authentic self, who we are. We are showing a version of ourselves. We're showing the super smart version of ourself or the highly interested and attentive version of ourselves. But that's not really the true version of ourselves, as I think most people are, which is we've got our little warts, we've got our, ticks, we've got the strange things that make up who we are, right? Ever since I think texting and casual communication, however, became a huge thing, I've noticed that the degree to which people follow up with one another has gone down. And the degree to which I take that extra step to close the loop on a situation, the tendency of that has gone down. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if I introduced Charles to Jeffrey, um, and Charles and Jeffrey met, Charles would then call me after the meeting and say, "Hey, thank you so much for introducing me to Jeffrey. Really had a great conversation. This is what came out of it. Thanks again." People don't do that as much anymore.
Mm,
And I think it's not because people are inherently evil. It's not the case at all. But it's just because everybody assumes that it's okay.
hmm
However, when I find somebody who essentially goes old school, right? And who takes the time to thank me, endures the pain of writing me a note, an actual physical note, and sticking it in the mail and sending it to me, I think to myself, okay, this person is telegraphing something to me, that they are willing to invest in me in a way that is out of consensus, right? And if they are willing to do that, that typically correlates very well to people who, insofar as my relationship with them is concerned, are going to outperform. So if you take the time to do things you don't have to do to take care of the relationship that we have, I'm loving you. I'm not saying
mm.
you don't have your faults, but I'm saying this is somebody who I'm hopefully going to outperform for and who will outperform for me. And so I look very carefully, not at the big things, but the little things that people either do or don't do as a signal for what kind of relationship we can have. And I'll tell you another one too. This is one of my favorites. This is not really etiquette related, but it will speak to the point of the little things. Um, it's really fascinating now that many of us have many of our meetings on Zoom, right? Let's say we have a half-hour Zoom call, and Jeffrey, you appear very professional and proper and smiley and friendly and gracious during the call. We have our call, and in the last 3 seconds of our call, after we've said goodbye, you're going to hit leave, but your face changes dramatically. And all of a sudden, rather than the kind, smiley, handsome Jeffrey, I see a very ugly, mean, ornery look that comes across your
No,
face.
no, that cannot be. No, no, no.
But my point is, we've all been in meetings where we see that. And the true
Mm.
version of who they are
Wow.
has been revealed in that last 3 seconds of the meeting. They've killed the entire value of the meeting by letting their guard down and showing me what they're really, really like when they're not pretending. That's what details are all about in terms of having the ability to infer from alpha. I may not invest in you if I see that in the last 3 seconds of the call, you're really an angry, miserable person, even if you were pretending to be somebody else. Now, granted, if you follow through and with all the etiquette and all the things I've talked about, maybe I'll give you another chance. But in general, we should all think of ourselves like CIA agents, right? And we should be looking for the little details because those are the ones that are most revealing. And etiquette within that construct is a big bucket where I can easily find things out about people that they are not intentionally trying to reveal to me.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So you mean that people sometimes give up by subtle hints that their self that they're using is fake or
Yes,
that they
yes,
pretend not.
yes. But when somebody goes out of their way to adhere to proper etiquette during an era where very few people care about it, that ups the probability of an outperformance in the relationship. There
Mm.
is up there is increased probability that this person is going to come through for me and then I'm going to come through for them in turn. Because I hate to have trade deficits with people. If you do right by me, I'm going to work like hell to do right by you.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff and I covered this in a different episode, but we talk about the reciprocal nature of people. We want to give what we receive, and when it comes to any kind of relationship, if you are receiving something that feels out of the ordinary or feels above and beyond the normalcy of the situation, you feel inclined to give. You feel inclined to reciprocate, and it only helps build that relationship further. So, um, I'm 100% on board with this idea of etiquette alpha, and building past the point, and then more importantly, being able to notice when people build past the point of normalcy.
Let me just give you another one just to kind of throw it in there.
Mm,
And again, like I can understand if you might think I'm crazy for what I'm about to say to you all, but I really believe it.
I love this. Okay.
If I call you Charles,
Mm,
and rather than call me back, you send me a text. What you have just done is a subtle flex by downgrading the mode of our communication.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not saying that I'm like going to officially sort of, declare you a non-friend, but when people do that to me, it sends me a signal. It sends me the signal that they are not going to grant me the courtesy of communicating with me in the format that I have chosen, the medium that I have chosen to communicate to them. It's
mm,
okay if you upgrade. It's okay if you, Jeffrey, text me and I call you, because calling is higher up on the totem pole than texting. But when somebody downgrades you, unless there is a special reason, like you're on a plane and you're probably not in a position to make the call, but you can probably sneak in a text before they tell you to turn off your phone. Unless there is something like that going on,
mm,
I view it as a negative sign. But when people upgrade me, I view it as a positive sign.
mm,
Oh, it's actually a question that I'm asking myself these days is what about just calling, instead of sending a message? Because yeah, I tend to send a lot of messages and I don't really like it. Sometimes I prefer to have the person on the phone, but I hesitate because I wonder then if the relation is already developed enough to make the call.
Yeah, I mean the way in which I address that issue, because let's face it, most people are not around and not available for when you call them. I have found myself in the last couple of years relying heavily on voice memos. And
mm,
voice is a much richer form of communication than text or email, because you hear the inflections of my voice, you get my energy, and you get the sense of whether or not I'm really concerned and I care about you in a way that a flat message with just letters can't do. So I do that, and by the way, not that I'm in the dating market, but I hear from friends, a lot of the dating apps now are really leaning into voice,
mm.
because of the rich nature of that communication. So to me, the totem pole is always about what is the richer form of communication. The richer the form of communication, the higher up it is. The, you know, more the communication is simple and subject to interpretation and the like, the lower the form, the lower it is on the totem pole.
Wow. That's a really powerful concept, I think, because we, by our nature, try to do the easiest, fastest, most reliable thing, which has been constantly downgrading to something that is so informal, like a message, right? But the power that you get from seeing someone's face, or at the very least, hearing their voice and hearing the different inflections and the different kinds of, the ability to see a smile or hear a smile, um, it's so powerful. And I think we forget that we have that natural ability to communicate, and we just replaced it with easy alternatives via technology.
The be the
Um,
be but the best one, I will say, to sort of build off that, let's say like
mm,
you did something terrible to Jeffrey and you're feeling really guilty about it. Take a video message of yourself and send it to him so he can see the contrition in your face, Charles. And it's effort to send a video message, right? You have to make sure the camera's right. you're in the frame, everything's looking good, you've got it lit well, you know what you're going to say. You press the button right, the button actually records because sometimes it doesn't. And then you leave your message, Jeffrey, I'm so sorry. I'm totally wrong. I will never do that again. I promise, you know, I'll give you back the 500,000, like whatever it is, right? Um, but when you get to see the face, the voice, the body language all together, there's a better chance that Jeffrey is going to forgive you than in a text message, hey, Jeffrey, I'm really sorry about what I did.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. 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 Wow. That's genius. I would never have thought of doing something like this.
Yeah, me neither. Now, Jeff,
Wow.
can I borrow $500,000 really quick? No, but that's an incredible concept. I think it it just blows my mind how easy it is to connect, but how difficult it is to maintain that connection unless you're taking the appropriate kind of measures to show how much you care. And I think that that's something that many other people have fallen flat on their face for, but these are really interesting concepts that can help build that. That's fantastic. So, you know, we talked a lot about your work and the things that you find interesting and passionate and all the skills that came into it. But part of this podcast is to help people get comfortable with not just what you do, but how to get to where you are. Uh, Is there any sage advice that you can offer someone who's considering going into coaching for businesses or executives, something that can help them get from 0 to 1?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind. The first thing is um, I'm really happy, you know, now that I've got a 5 next to my age, I'm really happy to be a coach at this point in my life. But I think at 35 or 40, I would not have been as good a coach because I would not have had the same amount of life experience. So for people who want to get into executive coaching, and there are a lot, it's becoming a pretty popular field. I think it's important to first build up a certain amount of scar tissue from having seen a lot of situations. And it's a wonderful second or third or fourth job um, based upon, you know, having done a bunch of different things that have given you a variety and an understanding of different patterns, right? Because pattern recognition is really important in what I do. I might not know about every industry or every situation, but I've probably seen things that are kind of like that in the past. So that's one thing. Um, Another thing I would suggest is, and this is a big part of what I coach people on, but I've applied it to myself as well. There is a huge difference between your job and your career, right? Most
Mm.
people confuse their job and their career, right? And as a result of that, the job becomes their career, and there's very little time left to do anything else. Because after all, you feel guilty if you're not giving 100% to your job. Reality is, there is no job where you're working for someone else. You should be a great employee, you should be diligent, you should be thorough, you should work hard, but you should never put all of your eggs in one basket. The nature of the economy with the freight train of AI and everything else hitting it, I think necessitates that you always create some diversity in who you are as a professional. So, Charles, you are the CEO of Charles Corp. Jeffrey, you're the CEO of Jeffrey Corp. And you can have a job as a key pillar as part of your career, but not the only pillar. And so for me, as I may have mentioned to you before we started recording, or maybe it was after we started recording, I'm primarily a coach, but I'm also an investor and a trader. And I used to have a podcast and I used to do a bunch of other things that collectively, you know, created my career. And for any number of different situations, for any number of different reasons, you know, I could lean a little bit more heavily into one and a little lighter into another if conditions warranted. I believe in having that diversification. So what I would say to be happy as a coach, yes, you know, you hope you have a ton of clients always coming in, but it is important to not lose touch with the real world and the real, let's say, business world, if you want to be a coach for businesses. So be an advisor. If you can afford it, have an investment or two. If you can be on the board of a company, great. If you can do something else for a company, do it. And it's not cheating on your day job as an executive coach. It's adding dimension and diversity to it. So I believe that you should be an executive coach if you want to be an executive coach, but you should not forgo other things that you find interesting that you could do. The other point I would just make is, particularly for people in their, let's say, 20s and 30s who are still in career building mode in a more dynamic way, living beneath your means is the single best thing to do with any excess money you happen to earn. I mean, yes, saving and investing and all that. But my point is that you always want to consume less than you could otherwise get away with. And the reason why is, in terms of, me starting my coaching business, took a while for it to get up off the ground. And I wanted to do it on my own terms, in my own way, with the types of clients who I want. But you need the cushion in order to do that. Much like I started my company after I had left Wall Street for 13 years and I'd saved up a bunch of money. So it's obviously not it's easier said than done. But in general, my advice for people who want to go into executive coaching is to recognize that it's tough going, that it takes a while to get that flywheel up and running. And in order to do so, it's helpful to have X amount of cushion to finance yourself while you're trying to rev up your business.
That's incredible. I can always tell a boxer or a fighter is an amateur if they don't have any scars. And I think there's a lot to be said about people going into the business of giving advice, not having lived a full life themselves, not having taken those bumps and lumps to build that muscle to say, yes, this is the right move. On top of that, I love the idea of becoming something that's more well-rounded. I always thought of myself as a financial professional. That's what I was. That's what I would continue to be. That was part of my identity. But discovering, connecting with people, discovering, creating deep connections with people that have nothing to do with finance prompted me to start developing different parts of myself that weren't my job, right? They were my career. I learned to connect. I learned to talk. I learned to really reach out to people and meet wonderful people like yourself. I mean, there's so much opportunity out there to connect things that don't matter to a job, but matter to building a person. And finally, listen, everyone likes having a little cash in the bank, right? I think that's sage advice no matter where you are in life, but man, is it hard owning your own business. It's tough being a business owner. It's tough getting something off the ground. The more times you can hear it, the more times you can implement it, the better off you're going to be, I think.
Let me just say on that front, and I'm borrowing from Jay-Z on this. Um, I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. And I love that because as a coach, right, my COGS are very low. My CapEx is very low. If you deliver value on a consistent basis, if you work hard for your clients, it is a very nice, high margin, repeatable business. And essentially the business is me. So I'm a business man. And I love that. And when Jay-Z said that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's my new mantra.
Listen, there's a reason some of his most famous albums are The Blueprint. The man knows what he's doing. Great reference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, Greg, so many insights, so much value in this episode. It was really amazing. Now, I would like to ask you a question that we ask to all our guests. You now have 2 minutes to share a message with everyone on Earth of today but also everyone from the next generations as well. With this magical mic that I'm giving you right now, what would you tell them?
That is quite a profound question. And I'm going to compliment you on your question for the next 5 seconds while I figure out what I'm going to say in response. I mean, really, marvelous, marvelous question. And I have to say you delivered it in such a phenomenal way. Really, hats off to you. And Charles, the degree to which you added positive energy to what Jeffrey said is really quite amazing. So, guess what I would say is that we human beings are an incredible species who is also our own worst enemy. And perhaps the greatest way in which we sabotage ourselves is through tribalism. And tribes take many different forms. They can take the forms of religion. They can take the forms of a nationality. They can take the forms of which college football team or English Premier League team that you like. But when you just think about around the world, how many wars or quasi-wars are happening today? When you think about how many wars have existed throughout history, you can say, well, that's because limited, resources are limited. And so because we have more people than resources, there is, inherent and fundamental tension that exists, which sometimes spills over into bitter political divides and then politics. Clausewitz talked about politics is essentially war by other means, right? It all sort of comes to the same place, which is people fight. And while I acknowledge that resource limitations have a lot to do with why people fight on an individual basis, on a business basis, on a national basis, I also think it's because there's something in our brains. Maybe it's like the lizard part of our brain, right? If you read, Yuval Harari's book, he talks a lot about that. I think there is just this something about tribalism that ultimately is a net negative. And it's not to say that people of faith, aren't wonderful people, or people that like the Mets aren't wonderful people, or people that like, Saint-Germain are not wonderful people. But this us versus them dynamic that seems to be pre-programmed into our human software in our brain, I think does more harm than good in a world where, by the way, we actually have enough food to feed everybody if we wanted to. It's just that we can't figure out, even with the magic of the markets, and I love markets and I love capitalism, but even with the magic of the markets and the magic of capitalism, you still have situations where a shocking percentage of American children, go to bed hungry every night. And that's not to mention the developing world. And I think more of it has to do with, at least today, this us versus them mentality that seeps into our consciousness. And oftentimes, there is the positive side of tribalism that is ultimately the gateway drug into the negative side, right? There's nothing wrong with being proud of your nationality, but nationality and patriotism is great up to a point, but then after that point, it becomes terrible because it's us versus them, and then the majority starts persecuting the minorities and the like. And of course, it is true with religion as well. So this is my long-winded, pretentious way of saying that if I could lecture, or if I could beseech the world to do something that I believe would be positive for everybody, it would be, in general, to tone down the tribalism and to recognize that it's still okay to be a part of a tribe, much in the same way it's okay to be a competitor to another business. But as long as you have basic respect, and as long as you recognize that we're all human beings and we're all pretty much basically made out of the same stuff, that is the most important thing. And so that's what I think I would spend my 2 minutes beseeching the world if I had the opportunity to do so.
That's incredible. We are the tribe, right? It's not Mets versus Yankees. It's not Christianity versus anything else. It's it's just all of us together on this big blue ball trying to figure out how to make the best of it. Gregg, with that being said, thank you so much for spending this time with us. It was so cool learning about what makes you passionate.
Thank you very much.
What led you here, and honestly, this was so enlightening for me and hopefully for our listeners. And guys, if you made it this far, please make sure to like, subscribe, send it to a friend. Maybe send a clip of this to a friend that you want to get to know a little bit better. See what I did there? But thank you so much. This was awesome. Thanks for being on our show.
And let me just say, thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Charles. You guys are wonderful hosts. I wish you guys huge success with this wonderful, wonderful journey that you're on. And I want to thank the listeners as well. If you've gotten this far, I really do appreciate it. And so thank you as well.
Awesome. You can find Gregg's info in the links below. And as always, stay casually, bro.
Bye-bye.